Welcome to the Luman Walters, Joseph Smith's mentor video. All right, a statement from Mormon historian B.H. Roberts. He's talking about credulity, or basically being gullible. He says, yes, the prophet Joseph Smith's ancestors were credulous or gullible. It may be admitted that some of them believed in fortune-telling, in warlocks, and in witches. So they were superstitious. They believed in this kind of folk magic stuff. Some of them believed in fortune-telling, and there is some evidence that actually Joseph Smith pretended to be a fortune teller as well. All right, they talked about this kind of stuff in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy chapter 18, KJV. There shall not be found among you anyone that useth divination, or is an enchanter, or a witch, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. For all that do these things are an abomination unto the Lord. Well, they called Luman Walters a wizard. They called him a necromancer. Joseph Smith was also called a necromancer. All right, so the thesis of this video is that Luman Walters was one of Joseph Smith's mentor, maybe the main primary mentor for Joseph Smith in his treasure digging and his early folk magic and that sort of thing. First slide here is from D. Michael Quinn's book, Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview. We're going to use that book quite a bit for this video. He says Luman Walters was born in Winchester, Connecticut in 1788. All right, some information from Cowdery, Vanek, and Davis's book, The Spalding Enigma, talking about Emma Smith, the wife of Joseph Smith, talking about her mother, Elizabeth Lewis. Elizabeth was born near the Walters' home in Litchfield, Connecticut in 1767. So maybe some kind of a connection here between Emma Smith's family and the Walters family. All right, here is a map showing where Luman Walters was born. You see that red pin at the top here in the north. Luman was born in Winchester, Connecticut. And Emma Smith's mother, Elizabeth Lewis, was born in Litchfield, Connecticut, about 13 miles south of Luman Walters. And supposedly they were related. All right, so also from the same source here, the Spalding Enigma talks about Elizabeth Lewis, the mother of Emma Smith, moving to Wells, Vermont, where she married Isaac Hale in 1790. So Elizabeth Lewis and Isaac Hale living in Wells, Vermont here in 1790. The Walters family was living up north in Burke, Vermont. But it was about a 3-hour car ride to Burke. So they, around this time, and the dates are not lining up exactly here. We're talking about 1790 for Elizabeth Lewis, and we're talking about 1798 for the Walters family. But yeah, it's about 164 miles, so really not that close anymore. But they used to be pretty close. All right, some interesting information in the Susquehanna Register newspaper, May 1st, 1834. This information came from an affidavit from Isaac Hale, the husband of Elizabeth Lewis Hale. They were living in Harmony, Pennsylvania at the time. They were boarding Joseph Smith Jr., the soon-to-be prophet. Joseph Jr. was involved in some treasure quests or treasure digging at this time. But in this affidavit, Isaac Hale says that the residence of Luman Walters' kin, Elizabeth Lewis Hale, whose husband Isaac Hale signed a treasure digging agreement with Joseph Smith Sr. and Josiah Stoll in the fall of 1825. So Hale is saying, yes, his wife, Elizabeth Lewis, was related to Luman Walters. They were kin. And from some other sources, I was able to find out that Elizabeth Lewis was a distant cousin to Luman Walters, but Isaac Hale knew they were related. So kind of interesting, kind of a connection here that possibly of how Joseph Smith Jr. got to know Luman Walters. All right, back to Quinn's book, Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview. You can see the cover here. He talks about all this stuff in a lot of detail. I'm just kind of mentioning some highlights. Quinn says, early Mormon converts included the neighbors of the Walter family from Connecticut, plus relatives and in-laws. So some of those early converts were neighbors to Luman Walters in Connecticut, so that's another way maybe that Joseph Smith got to know Walters. All right, we talked about the Walters family living in Burke, Vermont. This is the source for that. The Gazette, I'm not sure how you say that. Gazette of Caledonia and Essex counties, Vermont, is the source. Says in there, sometime between 1798 and 1800, the Walter family relocated to Burke, Vermont. All right, another statement from Quinn. Before Joseph Smith Sr. moved in 1816 from Vermont to New York, he was in close geographic proximity with Luman Walters' family, and possibly in personal contact as well. So that's interesting. Sometime before 1816, when they moved to New York, Joseph Smith Sr. and family and kids were living in close proximity to Luman Walters, and we'll show that on a map on the next slide. Joseph Smith Sr. pictured above here. All right, so here's a map of that. You can see that the Walters family was living in Burke, Vermont. This was sometime between 1798 and 1800. During this time frame, the Joseph Smith Sr. family was living in Tunbridge, Vermont. Alvin Smith and Hiram Smith were both born between 1798 and 1800 in Tunbridge, Vermont. So you can see it's fairly close. It's about 75 miles between Tunbridge and Burke, or about an hour and a half car ride, or about 2 long days on horseback. So, you know, it's doable. All right, some interesting information from Kathleen Melanakos from her book Secret Combinations. Came out in 2018. Talking about Joseph Smith Sr. and his family moving from Vermont to New York. This happened in 1816. Joseph Smith Sr. went ahead first with a Mr. Howard, and Joseph Smith Sr. entrusted Mr. Howard's cousin, Caleb Howard, to bring his wife, his limping son, Joseph Smith Jr., and the rest of his 8 children across a long 325-mile trip from Norwich, Vermont to Palmyra. So by 1816, they're living in Norwich, Vermont. And it turns out that Caleb Howard, who was bringing his family across from Vermont to New York, Caleb Howard was probably another relative of Rodsman Luman Walters. So here's another potential connection of how Joseph Smith Jr. and his family might have known Luman Walters. All right, we're going to move along in chronological order here based on the date of the accounts. So we're now at 1818, an account in the Concord Gazette, a New Hampshire newspaper, talking about Luman Walters escaping from jail. This is a statement from Deputy Sheriff James Giddings. And he says, a transient person, a person moving from town to town, calling himself Layman Walter or Luman Walter, has for several days past has been imposing upon the credulity of the people, the gullibility of the people in this vicinity. He has a pretended knowledge of magic, palmistry, and conjuration, etc. So Luman Walters being accused of all these things. Went to jail for it, I guess. He's probably defrauding people. And it's interesting that Joseph Smith later on would be accused of these same things too. Magic, fortune telling, maybe through the palm, and conjuration. All right, same account here in the Concord Gazette, a New Hampshire newspaper. Luman Walter was yesterday apprehended by civil authority, brought to trial before Benjamin Little, Esquire, convicted of the charges in the complaint, which we already talked about, and sentenced as the law provides to the House of Correction. It's interesting, Joseph Smith got arrested for these same kind of things later on. All right, so the account continues. But breaking from his keepers has made his escape. So Luman Walters escaped this jail. This is therefore to advise the public of such a character and to offer to any person $5 as a reward who will secure the said Luman Walter or Luman Walter in the jail in Hopkinton, New Hampshire, county of Hillsborough, or return him to me, the subscriber, in Boscawen within 14 days from this date. So apparently he broke out of the jail that was in Hopkinton, New Hampshire. So we know where Luman Walters was here in 1818. All right, so you can see on this map, Hopkinton, New Hampshire, almost on the east coast here. Quite a ways away from Palmyra, New York. So remember, this is 1818. Joseph Smith Sr. and family, including Joseph Smith Jr., are now in Palmyra, New York. Luman Walters is in Hopkinton, New Hampshire. This is a long ways away, so probably not any interaction at this time. At this time in 1818, it's like a 7-hour drive. All right, so what was Luman Walters doing in 1819? To be precise, November 1819. Well, he got married. Luman Walters got married to a Harriet Howard in Andover, Vermont in November 1819. You can look in the Andover, Vermont town record book. Okay, you can also look in the 1820 census for Andover, Vermont. Luman Walters is listed as a resident there. So we know that 1819, 1820, he's living in Andover, Vermont, and it looks like they have a nice autumn there. All right, so how far away was Luman Walters from Joseph Smith Jr. at this time, 1819, 1820? You can see he was living over here on the right side of this map in Andover, Vermont. Joseph Smith Jr.'s living all the way over here in Manchester, New York. This is about, if you take the short route, it's about 280 miles, so probably not much interaction between the two families or between Luman Walters and Joseph Smith Jr. at this time. All right, so what happened next for Luman Walters? Well, his first child was born in Newark, Vermont on May 15 of 1821. You can look in the Vermont General Index to the vital records. All right, so sometime after 1821, Luman Walters moves to the Saunders, New York area, which is pretty close to where Joseph Smith Jr. was at the time in Palmyra, New York. So this is, again, is from Kathleen Melanakos' book. She says that Luman Walters lived in the Palmyra, New York area in the early 1820s, but he removed to Saunders, New York, 19 miles north of Palmyra, so pretty close, to escape the law. Nevertheless, the distance did not prevent Walters from spending many overnight visits with the Smith family. All right, so here's a map of Saunders. New York. Luman Walters supposedly staying around the Sodus area or around Sodus Point or around Pulteneyville. We'll get to that account, but generally in that area. Palmyra is only about 20 miles south. So what, maybe a half a day on horseback. Okay, here we come to an important account here from Joseph Smith's neighbor Lorenzo Saunders, November 12th, 1884 account in an interview by E.L. Kelly. So long after the fact, but it's important because it links Luman Walters to the Joseph Smith family, links him as a treasure digger or a treasure digger advisor in the Manchester, Palmyra, New York area. So Saunders says, at the time the big hole was dug in the hill, that's Miners Hill, it was a cave dug sometime before October 1825. We're not sure of the exact date, sometime in the early 1800s. You can see a picture of the hill above. It had no trees in 1907 and then full of trees in 2015. It's Miners Hill. Saunders says, Alvin Smith, who is Joseph Smith's older brother, and a Willard Chase was duped by one Luman Walters who pretended to be a conjurer. I heard Willard Chase say that he was duped. They could not be deceived in it after he had gone through with a certain movements and charged them $7. So for this fee, Luman Walters would tell you where to dig. He was a treasure digger. Joseph Smith Jr. Followed in his footsteps. Luman was kind of a mentor, and Joseph Smith would do the same kind of things. Okay, so the same account continues. Interview with Joseph Smith's neighbor, Lorenzo Saunders. This is about a cave on Benjamin Tabor's farm in Manchester, New York. It may have also been owned by Abner Cole, a newspaperman, who will get to his important account later on about Luman Walters. So Saunders goes on. He says, I seen the old man Joseph Smith Sr. dig there on Miners Hill, day in and day out. So here we have the old man, or Joseph Smith Sr., digging here all the time, he says, day in and day out in this Miners Hill. And this cave actually still exists. Here's a picture of it. Some guys did some research to find it and got like a backhoe and kind of dug it out. That is the actual cave in Miners Hill. It's a pretty, goes in there quite a long ways. A lot of that digging was done by Joseph Smith Sr. So Saunders says, I used to go there and see them work. Joseph Smith Jr. never did work. He was a lazy dog. So this is an important part of the account too. It links Luman Walters to Joseph Smith Sr. And it sounds like Joseph Smith Jr. was there, just not working. That's the way. That's what I assume from this. Probably went there with his dad on occasions. His dad's there day in and day out. Joseph is there, probably watching. But Saunders says he never did work. He was a lazy dog, and I think that was kind of a pattern that would continue for Joseph Smith Jr. He would look in his hat and his stone and tell people where to dig, but you know, he was the magician. He was the conjurer, and didn't do the digging. All right, so here is an artist's rendition of a treasure dig. You draw the big circle around it, dig the hole in the middle. Kind of interesting. All right, so during this time frame, the early 1820s is when Joseph Smith was also doing his treasure digging advising people where to dig, looking into his stone in his hat. This is the same time period when Luman Walters is in the area. He's presumably living in Sodus, New York, just north of Joseph Smith. So Yeah, that Joseph Smith's treasure digging and Luman Walters' treasure digging in this area all happening around the same time. And then Quinn says in 1827, Joseph Smith broke with his former treasure digging associates to be the sole custodian of the Book of Mormon plates. So early 1800s up to about 1827, Joseph Smith's doing his treasure digging. Now after that, after 1827, he's focusing on the Book of Mormon plates, and he's kind of starting his religious career. All right. Turns out that Brigham Young probably knew Luman Walters as well. This is from Quinn's book again. Around 1828, Luman Walters lived about 30 miles northeast from Brigham Young's home in Mendon, New York. This is about 1 day's travel by horseback. All right, so this is about 1828. You can see Sodus up here in the right-hand corner. That's where Luman Walters was living. Brigham Young was living in Mendon, New York at the same time. It's about 40 miles away, or a long day of on horseback. All right, we have another court case, civil case in 1829. It's basically saying that Luman Walters was a defaulted debtor. I guess he had some debt that he couldn't pay off. This is Thomas Judson versus Luman W. Walters in the Sodus Town, New York Justice Civil Docket, sometime in the latter part of 1829. Says, civil records of Sodus, New York for 1829 show that a Luman W. Walters was a defaulted debtor in a civil case. As such, he may have been temporarily imprisoned on December 3rd. So maybe the second time when he's getting imprisoned, this time for unpaid debt. The time when he was in Hopkinton, New Hampshire, I guess, was for defrauding people, telling people where to dig, and basically conning them. All right, got some information from Lavina Anderson's book, Lucy's book, a critical edition of Lucy Mack Smith's family memoir, a very important record for early Mormonism. So in there, Lavina, I guess, says that one of Joseph Smith's treasure-digging friends, named Samuel Lawrence, who was a Palmyra neighbor, hosted Willard Chase and the conjurer, possibly Luman Walters, during the time of intense curiosity about the gold plates during 1829. So interesting. Treasure-digging friend of Joseph Smith, Samuel Lawrence, hosting Willard Chase and the conjurer. We know from our previous account that Luman Walters was doing some treasure digging with Willard Chase. So maybe he was staying, Luman and Willard staying at Samuel Lawrence's house. All right, we can also look at the 1830 census for Sodus, New York. Luman Walters is listed as a resident. So we have pretty good information about where he was, from 1820 to 1830. All right, John Brooke makes a statement here in The Refiner's Fire. Excellent book. It came out in 1994. He says, Joseph Smith learned his divining lore from his father, that's Joseph Smith Sr., and also from Luman Walter. That's where he learned his divining lore. Walter lived to the north in the town of Sodus, New York, which we've already talked about. Okay, according to a family history, Luman Walters was a clairvoyant who moved to Ohio. We know that Joseph Smith was in Kirtland, Ohio by February 1831. So maybe Luman Walters followed him around this time, around 1831. This information was found in June Parfitt's Family History, A Genealogy of the Walter Family, 1986. And pictured above, we have the Kirtland, Ohio temple. All right, so we know that Luman Walters was called a clairvoyant. Well, they also called Joseph Smith Jr. a clairvoyant, too. This is from an interview with Martin Harris in Tiffany's Monthly, 1859. So it says, young Joseph Smith had a stone in which, when it was placed in his hat and his face buried therein so as to exclude the light, he could see as a clairvoyant. So this is from an interview with Martin Harris, somebody that knew Joseph Smith pretty well, also calling Joseph Smith a clairvoyant, just like Luman Walters. And you can see the cover for Tiffany's Monthly here. All right, so D. Michael Quinn makes another statement here. He says that Luman Walters may have been a temporary convert to Mormonism from 1830 to 1833. So, yeah, from 1831 to 1833 in Ohio. Maybe Walters was a convert to the church for a short amount of time. Quinn is pictured above. All right, so by 1834, Luman Walters had moved away. He went to Gorham, New York. This is according to the Ontario County Deed Index. Luman Walters purchased land in Gorham, New York in 1834. And here's kind of a picture of Old Town Gorham nowadays. Okay, so here's a map of where Luman Walters was living in 1834. Up in the right-hand corner, you see Gorham, New York. That's where he moved to. Joseph Smith Jr. and the Saints are down in Kirtland, Ohio at this time in 1834. If you drive along the lake, it's like a 4-hour and 11-minute drive, 265 miles, so pretty far away. Probably not that much interaction now between Luman and Joseph after 1834. All right, also in 1834, the Saints moved from Kirtland, Ohio, all the way over to Jackson County, Missouri. So they've moved a lot further away from Luman. This is like a 17-hour drive, so not much chance that Luman's going to be coming into Jackson County, Missouri. All right, so by the year 1840, we have a census that says that Luman Walters is listed as a resident still of Gorham, New York. So at this time, in 1840, the Saints had moved over to Nauvoo, Illinois. It's still about a 14-hour drive, so probably not much interaction. All right, we'll do some preliminary statements here from some different historians who talk about Luman Walters. We'll get to the sources that they used for these statements later on in the video. These are kind of preliminary statements. First historian is Fawn Brody. She talks about Luman Walters in her book, No Man Knows My History. So Brody says, excitement over the possibilities of Indian treasure and perhaps buried Spanish gold reached its height in Palmyra, New York, with the coming of what the editor of the Palmyra Reflector called a vagabond fortune teller named Luman Walters. So that's what he was referred to as in the Palmyra Reflector. That's Abner Cole. We'll get to his record later on. Calls him a vagabond fortune teller. So kind of going here, going there, town to town, telling people's fortunes, telling people where to dig for buried treasure. So Luman Walters so won the confidence of several farmers that for some months they paid him $3 a day to hunt for buried money on their property. All right, they called Luman Walters a fortune teller. It's also interesting to note that they also called Joseph Smith Jr. a fortune teller. This is a letter from John S. Reed to Brigham Young in 1861. Reed says, in 1830, Joseph Smith's legal counsel defended against the crime of glass-looking, juggling, fortune-telling, and so on. So, Yeah, Joseph Smith was arrested for these things, I believe in 1826. Glass-looking, juggling, fortune-telling. All right, a neighbor of Joseph Smith in Manchester, New York, said something similar. The neighbor's name was Henry Harris. His affidavit is in Eber D. Howe's book, Mormonism Unveiled, 1834. So Harris says, Joseph Smith Jr., the pretended prophet, used to pretend to tell fortunes. He had a stone which he used to put in his hat, by means of which he professed to tell people's fortunes. All right, another account here from another Joseph Smith neighbor, Christopher M. Stafford. This can be found in Naked Truths About Mormonism, which came out in 1888. In there it says that, Christopher Stafford says that Joseph Smith told me that there was a peep stone for me and many others if we could only find them. So I guess Joseph told people you could have your own peep stone, your own seer stone, to get your own information, your own revelations, etc. Joseph Smith claimed to have revelations and tell fortunes. So there it is again. He told my fortune by looking in the palm of my hand. So palmistry, something that Luman Walters also did. And he said, I would not live to be very old. So not sure how that prophecy went, but a lot of Joseph Smith's prophecies were failed. All right, so Fawn Brody continues here. In addition to crystals, stuffed toads, mineral rods, those are kind of like dowsing rods, I guess, to find minerals or find water. The scryer's usual paraphernalia, Walters claimed to have found an ancient Indian record that described the locations of their hidden treasure. So interesting here, and we're going to get to the original sources for all this. But Walters claimed to have found an ancient Indian record. Who else claimed to find an ancient Indian record a little later on? All right, so Brody continues. Luman Walters, would read aloud to his followers. He'd actually read people this ancient Indian record. He read in what seemed to be a strange and exotic tongue, but it was actually, the newspaper editor declared, an old Latin version of Caesar's orations. Probably meant Cicero's orations, because there is no Caesar's oration. So Luman Walters going around reading out of this book in this strange and exotic tongue, basically written in Latin of Cicero's orations. None of the people around there knew Latin, probably. So he probably did get some followers following him, thinking, oh, wow, this Cicero's orations really is an ancient record of the Indians. And Luman Walters is going to interpret it for us, or basically translate this record for us. Sounds familiar, right? And pictured above here, we have the title page for Volume 1 of Cicero's orations. I think there's a number of volumes. She mentions the newspaper editor. That's Abner Cole, and we'll get to him. Okay, so Brody continues here. The press accounts describing Walters' activity, published in 1830 to 1831, so very early on, stated significantly that when he left the neighborhood, his mantle fell upon young Joseph Smith. So interesting, right there. A number of other historians are going to say the same thing here, which we'll get to. The mantle of Luman Walters fell upon young Joseph Smith. All right, Brody continues here. Where the honest wizard is taken aback when his charms fail conspicuously, the deliberate deceiver always has an excuse. Certainly, Joseph Smith's mentor, the conjurer, Luman Walters, belonged to the latter class. So you got to always have an excuse of why your advice failed, why the treasure dig failed, why he told you to dig in a certain spot, they found nothing. Got to have some excuses. Luman Walters was good at coming up with excuses. They did something wrong in the ritual. They said a few words wrong. The treasure slipped down into the earth. Whatever it is, Luman Walters had good excuses, and then Joseph Smith learned that behavior as well, and Joseph Smith came up with his own excuses. All right, Brody continues here. She's pictured above. It is clear that Joseph Smith had no desire to make a life profession of emulating Walters, because we know he went on to have a religious career as a prophet. So starting around 1827, he's kind of leaving the treasure digging, money digging behind, bringing forth the Book of Mormon translation, starting his own religion, things which Luman Walters didn't do. Perhaps he gave up the trickery and artifice just when their hollowness became most evident to him. All right, let's go to a different historian, John L. Brooke, in the Refiner's Fire book, 1994. He says that Luman Walters was the conjurer reputed to have taught Joseph Smith the arts of divining in the 1820s. All right, another historian, Ernest H. Taves, Ph.D. and M.D. He wrote a book entitled Trouble Enough, Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon, 1984. I mentioned this in videos before, but Joseph Smith put the original manuscript of the Book of Mormon in the cornerstone of the Nauvoo house, I believe. And he says, "I've had trouble enough with this thing." Which is kind of a strange thing to say. It's kind of like he didn't write it or something. But Taves says in here, it is easy to speculate that Joseph Smith's relationship to Luman Walters may have been one of the most seminal of his life. All right, another historian, Richard S. Van Wagner, in his book Natural Born Seer, came out in 2016. It's about the early life of Joseph Smith, 1805 to 1830. In there, Van Wagner says that Joseph Smith's principal early mentor was folk magician Luman Walters. All right, Kathleen Milanakos says something very similar. She says, Luman Walters, a conjurer who had originated in Connecticut, would become an occult mentor to Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith in Palmyra, New York. All right, another historian that mentions Luman Walters is Richard Bushman. In his first book about Joseph Smith, entitled Joseph Smith and the Beginnings of Mormonism, 1984, it's interesting that none of this Luman Walters material made it into Rough Stone Rolling, his next big book on Joseph Smith. So he left that behind. Not sure why he did that. Maybe he thought it was too controversial. Maybe he thought there wasn't enough evidence to support it. We're going to show that that's not the case in this video. But it's interesting that he doesn't cover this hardly at all in Rough Stone Rolling. I think he mentions Luman Walters' name, only the last name, Walters, in a list of a bunch of people that may have known Joseph Smith. But he doesn't really say anything about Walters. He doesn't even mention his first name. So yeah, that's interesting. But anyway, in this book, Bushman says, without making a direct accusation, he, Abner Cole, surmised that Joseph Smith worked under the inspiration of Walters the magician, apparently an actual person who had caused a stir in Palmyra, New York, somewhat earlier. All right, so Bushman continues. Abner Cole attributed the idea of a book to Luman Walters. Idea of a book about the ancient American Indians, which, of course, Joseph Smith later did with the Book of Mormon. Attributed the idea of a book to the vagabond fortune teller Luman Walters from the town of Sodus, New York, who was reputed to have shown his followers a copy of Cicero's orations in Latin and claimed it was a record of the former inhabitants of America, telling where they deposited their treasure. So same thing Von Brody is saying. All right, so let's get to some original sources here. Probably the most significant are from Abner Cole. He was a newspaper editor of the Palmyra Reflector. He was also a lawyer by profession. He printed a parody of the Book of Mormon called the Book of Puki, parody of the Book of Mormon, in his Palmyra paper, the Reflector, or some people call it the Palmyra Reflector. Printed this Book of Puki in 1830, so very early on, very soon after the Book of Mormon was published. So that's something historians like to see. They like to see contemporary accounts, very early accounts, rather than 20, 30, or 50 years later. All right, so the first account here is going to be in the Palmyra Reflector. This is all Abner Cole, June 12th, 1830 edition. Book of Mormon was published in March of 1830, so this article coming out in the Palmyra Reflector is just a few months after the Book of Mormon was published. So Abner Cole says, "Let us send for Walters the magician." Remember, this is a parody of the Book of Mormon. "Who has strange books and deals with familiar spirits. Peradventure he will inform us where the Nephites hid their treasure." So he had strange books. We already talked about Cicero's orations. He deals with familiar spirits. Pictured above is a strange book. No relation to the topic we're talking about here. It's just a strange-looking book. Okay, same article here, Palmyra Reflector, June 12th, 1830. Remember, the census for 1830 shows that Luman Walters was living in Sodus, New York, just 20 miles north of Palmyra. So he was close by. He could come in on day trips. So Walters is living in this area when this article is published. So Abner Cole says, "Now Walters the magician was a man unseemly to look upon. He produced an old book in an unknown tongue." Oh, he had to translate it, right? Which was Cicero's orations in Latin, from whence he read. He read strange stories of hidden treasures and of the spirit who had the custody thereof. So that would be an influence on Joseph, right? Stories of hidden treasures, which Joseph and his family participated in trying to find. And there was a spirit who had the custody of the treasure. So similar to the idea of the angel Moroni, right? You got this golden plates, which is definitely a treasure, would be extremely valuable. You have this treasure guardian or treasure spirit, Moroni. Okay, the account continues. "And the idle and the slothful paid tribute unto the magician," and gave him some money to point out where the treasure was, "and besought him, saying, O thou art wise above all men, and can interpret the book that no man understandeth." Just like Joseph, right? But we have a translation from English to Spanish. "Where is the train station? Donde está la estación de tren?" All right, he continues here. "And can discover hidden things by the power of thy enchantments. Lead us, we pray thee, to the place where the Nephites buried their treasure, and give us power over the spirit, and we will be thy servants forever." Right? That's the treasure guardian spirit. Moroni was similar, kind of a treasure guardian for the Book of Mormon golden plates. All right, Abner Cole continues here. "And the magician led the rabble into a dark grove." Remember, Luman Walters is this magician. "Led him into a dark grove in a place called Manchester, New York," very close to Palmyra, and then, of course, Lumen was living very close to Palmyra and Manchester, "where after drawing a magic circle with a rusty sword," this is what Lumen did, "and collecting his motley crew of tatterdemalions," or his ragged crew, within the center of this circle, I guess, this magic circle that he drew out with a rusty sword, he sacrificed a cock, or a chicken, I guess, a bird of Minerva, for the purpose of propitiating the prince of spirits. So you got to satisfy the treasure guardian, I guess. Pictured above, we got an old rusty sword, and some Jewish people on the right, I guess, who still sacrifice chickens even to this day. All right, so here's Manchester. It's just about 7 miles south of Palmyra. So definitely a place that Luman Walters could get to pretty easily. All right, so guess who else was interested in drawing magic circles? Well, D. Michael Quinn tells us in his book, Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview, drawing magic circles or soothsaying was one important interest of the Joseph Smith family. Joseph Smith Sr., we know Alvin was doing this kind of stuff. Joseph Smith Jr. was doing this kind of stuff. They would also draw their magic circles, I guess surrounding where the treasure was located. So, did they get this idea from Lumen? All right, so it sounds like Joseph Smith Jr. did similar types of animal sacrifices in these treasure digs, similar to sacrificing of a cock or a chicken. This can be found in a letter of Justice Joel King Noble, March 8, 1842. You can see the book where I got this from here. Justice Noble, who tried Joseph Smith in an 1830 trial in Colesville, New York, related in a letter that when Joseph Smith and others were digging for a chest of money, they acquired a black dog and offered it as a sacrifice, blood-sprinkled prayer made at the time. So similar to what Lumen was doing. No money was obtained, however, so which was often the case. Almost always, they would never find any treasure, but the treasure advisor, the treasure seer or treasure magician would get paid. All right, so Fawn Brody talks about this as well. She says another neighbor, William Stafford, swore that Joseph Smith told him that there was buried money on his property, but that it could not be secured until a black sheep was taken to the spot and led around a circle bleeding with its throat cut. So this is maybe how they did it, with the black dog and the chicken and this black sheep, cut its throat or somewhere in the body and let the blood drip around and carry that around in a circle, I guess, to appease the guardian spirit. All right, so the Palmyra Reflector, June 12th, 1830 article continues here. This is Abner Cole writing this. Many a livelong night was spent in digging for the root of all evil. What is the root of all evil? It's money, or treasure, I guess. These credulous or gullible and ignorant knaves were always disappointed, never could find the treasure, always some excuse. And when they became weary of their nightly labors, they said one to another, Lo, this imp of the devil hath deceived us. So they kind of catch on to Luman Walters. You said it was here. We did everything that you said to do. We thought we did it right, yet there's no treasure. So they would be deceived by Luman Walters, and then, later on Joseph Smith had the same kind of accusations against him. All right, same article continues here. Now, when Walters the magician heard these things, that's Luman Walters, he was sorely grieved, and said unto himself, Lo, mine occupation is gone. Even these ignorant vagabonds detect mine imposture. So they're kind of figuring him out as a fraud. All right, the story continues. I will away and hide myself, says Luman Walters, lest the strong arm of the law should bring me to justice. People get upset that they got defrauded, tell the police about it. And he took his book and his rusty sword and his magic stone. Interesting. Luman Walters had a magic stone, and his stuffed toad, and all his implements of witchcraft, and returned to the mountains near Great Sodus Bay, New York. So he, like I said, he was nearby, about 20 miles from Palmyra, about 27 miles from Manchester. So he would go up to Sodus, I guess, to escape the law. But he has this book that's in another language. It's kind of similar to the Book of Mormon, right? He's got his rusty sword. That's kind of similar to the sword of Laban, right? Which was supposedly found in the box with the golden plates as well. He had his magic stone, very similar, right, to Joseph Smith's seer stone. His stuffed toad. I don't think Joseph Smith had one of those. His implements of witchcraft. I think the Smith family did have some magic parchments, which we're not going to go into in this video. And then he returned, took all his stuff and returned to the Great Sodus Bay, New York. And pictured above, this is what it looks like today. Okay, the article continues here. Now the rest of the acts of the magician Luman Walters and how his mantle fell upon the prophet Joseph Smith Jr. and how Joseph made a league with the spirit, that's Moroni, I guess, who afterwards turned out to be an angel, and how he obtained the gold Bible, the treasure, right? The spectacles, the Urim and Thummim, like these glasses that you're supposed to look through that kind of have these stones in them, and the breastplate, will they not be faithfully recorded in the book of Pukai? How he obtained the gold Bible, the spectacles, the breastplate, and everything. All this will be recorded in the book of Pukai, which was what Abner Cole was writing. And you can see some of these implements pictured above. All right, so we're on to a different article about a month later. Palmyra Reflector still, but July 7th, 1830. So still really soon after the Book of Mormon was published. Also written by Abner Cole. And it came to pass that when the mantle of Walters the magician, Luman Walters, had fallen upon Joseph, his mantle fell upon Joseph, surnamed the prophet, the idle and the slothful gathered themselves together in the presence of Joseph, and said unto him, Lo, we will be thy servants forever. Do with us our wives and our little ones, as it may seem good in thine eyes. Interesting, he says, do with us what you want, and do with our wives as you want. Was Abner Cole already figuring out some of Joseph Smith's polygamy? And the prophet answered and said, Behold, hath not the mantle of Walters the magician fallen upon me? And am I not able to do before you, my people, great wonders, and shew you at a more proper season where the Nephites hid their treasure? And pictured above we have the Hill Cumorah. For lo, yes, tonight stood before me in the wilderness of Manchester, New York, the Spirit, who from the beginning has had in keeping all the treasures hidden in the bowels of the earth. So that's the treasure guardian spirit or angel, Moroni. Pictured above, Moroni burying the golden plates. Knowest thou not that thou art greater than all the money-digging rabble? That's Joseph Smith. You're greater than all those money diggers. And art chosen to interpret the book, golden plates, the Book of Mormon, which Mormon has written, to wit, the gold Bible. And lo, I answered the spirit of the money diggers, saying, How can these things be, as I can neither read nor write? This is Joseph Smith, can't read or write. And he said unto me, I will give thee a breastplate to keep thee from evil, and I will send thee an assistant, even Oliver Cowdery, the pedagogue, or the teacher, because he was a teacher. So that's interesting. July 1830, already this idea that Joseph Smith was this unlearned farm boy. And so people are kind of thinking, how could he have written or translated this Book of Mormon? Maybe Oliver Cowdery helped him. And I did a whole video about that. Did Oliver Cowdery write the Book of Mormon video? Okay, there's another article in the Palmyra Reflector as well, February 28, 1831. Also Admiral Cole here, I believe, says, "It is well known that a vagabond fortune teller by the name of Luman Walters, who then resided in the town of Saunders and was once committed to the jail of this county," I guess he's talking about Wayne County. Saunders, New York is also in Wayne County. So I guess, he was arrested. Luman Walters was arrested in 1818, and then also later on in Wayne County, I guess, or near Saunders, he was arrested again because he was committed to the jail of this county for juggling, which is playing tricks by sleight of hand, or in other words, deceiving people. This fortune teller, Luman Walters, was the constant companion and bosom friend of these money-digging impostors. And some of those money diggers were the Smith family. There remains but little doubt in the minds of those at all acquainted with these transactions that Luman Walters, who was sometimes called the conjurer, and was paid $3 per day for his service by the money diggers in this neighborhood, first suggested to Joseph Smith the idea of finding a book. Maybe that's where this idea came from, to find this book in another language on golden plates. Suggested maybe by Luman Walters. And pictured above, we have a book in another language. Not sure what kind of language that was. I think I forgot. It might be Latin. All right, same article. He's going to be covering some of the same ground again. Luman Walters, the better to carry on his own deception with these ignorant and deluded people who employed him, had procured an old copy of Cicero's orations in the Latin language, out of which he read long and loud to his credulous or gullible hearers. And there's a statue here of Cicero. All right, so Walters is reading out of this Latin book, uttering at the same time an unintelligible jargon, which he would afterwards pretend to interpret and explain. Sounds familiar, right? As a record of the former inhabitants of America, just like the Book of Mormon, and a particular account of the numerous situations where they had deposited their treasures previous to their final extirpation. All right, so we're going to get a little bit of overlap here. We're still here on the February 28, 1831 article. So far did this impostor carry this diabolical farce that not long previous to the pretended discovery of the Book of Mormon, Luman Walters assembled his nightly band of money diggers in the town of Manchester, New York. At a point designated in his magical book, and drawing a sword around the laborers with the point of an old rusty sword, and using sundry other incantations for the purpose of appropriating the spirit, he absolutely sacrificed a fowl, or a chicken. So we've kind of gone over these other things already. All right, so he says that they sacrificed a rooster in the presence of his awe-stricken wealth, and after digging until daylight, his deluded employers retired to their several habitations fatigued and disappointed because they didn't find anything. All right, going to a different account in the Painesville Telegraph in Ohio, March 22, 1831. E.D. Howe was the editor. He's the guy that came out with the book Mormonism Unveiled. This was a letter to the editor dated March 22, 1831, probably written by Abner Cole. So it says, the first idea of a book, quote unquote, was doubtless suggested to the Smith family by one Luman Walters. So according to Abner Cole, this is where Joseph Smith Jr. got the idea for the Book of Mormon. He got it from Luman Walters, who was a juggling fortune teller who made the ignorant believe that an old book in his possession in the Latin language contained an account of the antediluvians, or the people who lived before the flood, etc. And the word was given out that the book that Joseph Smith was about to find was a history of hidden treasures. All right, we're going to jump up to the 1840s now in Lucy Mack Smith's history from 1844 to 1845. That's Joseph Smith's mother. She's pictured above. We're going to be looking at the rough draft. That's the earliest copy we have. Sometimes they call it the preliminary manuscript. This is now at josephsmithpapers.org for everybody to read. So Lucy Mack Smith said that Joseph Smith Sr., her husband, was soon informed that 10 or 12 men were clubbed together with a one Willard Chase, who was a Methodist class leader at their head. And what was most ridiculous, they had sent for a conjurer. Now, was this conjurer Luman Walters? Well, a lot of historians believe that that's what she was talking about. They had sent for a conjurer, Luman Walters, to come 60 miles to divine the place where the record was deposited. So, yeah, he was only about, 20 or 27 miles away, so maybe she's talking about a round trip from Walters coming from Sodus, New York. All right, so D. Michael Quinn talking about Lucy Mack Smith's history here. He says, it seems clear that Lucy Mack Smith referred to Luman Walters in her history. And again, there's another picture of Lucy here. All right, her history continues here. By magic art, we were apprehensive that the golden plates were taken out and secreted somewhere, and we were somewhat uneasy, lest they might, like Moses, who was hid in the bulrushes, be discovered by our enemies. All right, her account continues. Accordingly, the morning after we heard of their plans, Joseph Smith Sr. went over a hill that lay to the east of us to see what he could discover among the neighbors there. At the first house he came to, he found the conjurer, probably Luman Walters, Willard Chase, and the company all together. These are probably the money diggers, too, but she doesn't really call them money diggers. She's talking about this conjurer and Willard Chase. We know that Willard Chase was working with Alvin Smith under Luman Walters, because we had that historical account of that previously. Okay, Lucy continues. They were devising many plans and schemes to find Joe Smith's gold Bible, as they termed it. The conjurer, or Luman Walters, was really animated, although he had traveled 60 miles during the latter part of the day and the night before. So maybe Luman Walters is hearing about this golden plates treasure, and he wants it. Okay, Lucy continues. You are cutting your own throat, the conjurer Luman Walters bawled out again at the top of his voice. I am not afraid of anybody. We will have the plates in spite of Joe Smith or all the devils in hell. Luman wanted the treasure. Maybe he was starting to believe that Joseph Smith was a prophet. Maybe he was starting to believe that he really did have the plates. All right, a brief little account here in Brigham Young's Diaries and Office Journals. April 28, 1850 account now. So you see this all went in chronological order. We're now up into the 1850s. Parley P. Pratt addressed the saints on mesmerism and other systems of necromancy, etc. Well, according to an account that we'll get to later, Luman Walters had studied mesmerism, and they also called him a necromancer. So it's interesting that Parley P. Pratt is talking about mesmerism and other systems of necromancy, etc. All right, so we talked about previously that Brigham Young probably knew Luman Walters and had probably met him before. Here's an account from a speech from the Prophet Brigham Young, the speech on April 6, 1850. And he says, I remember once at the commencement of the church, so around 1830, that's when Luman Walters was in the Palmyra area. I remember once at the commencement of the church a necromancer who had embraced the church, I guess. So if this is Luman Walters, which many historians think that that's who he's talking about here, maybe Luman Walters joined the church. We had talked about that previously. Michael Quinn had said that maybe he was a member, I believe, from 1831 to 1833. All right, so there was this necromancer who embraced the church, but he could not be satisfied. He came and said that he had fingered and handled the perverted priesthood so much, that's probably magic and the occult, I guess. The course I have taken is downwards. The devil has too fast a hold of me, and I cannot go with you. So maybe he went to Ohio for maybe 1 or 2 years, then he left, and I believe he went to Gorham. All right, so a comment here from D. Michael Quinn again. He says, it seems clear that Brigham Young referred to Luman Walters in these speeches. So we got the one on the previous slide. We have a couple more speeches coming up too, where Brigham Young refers to Luman Walters, this according to D. Michael Quinn. Most definitely the best historian on this kind of stuff, especially his book, Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview. All right, another account here in between Brigham Young's speeches. This is from an S.B. Hunt, Buffalo, New York, Medical Journal, 1854. He says, give our somewhile competitor, Dr. Luman Walters, the celebrated witch doctor of Canandaigua, New York, an education, dress him up in broadcloth, polish up his boorishness, and reform his profanity. We know that he liked to swear. But leave him the same unmitigated scamp that he now is, and according to this scale of qualification, he would not merit expulsion from the oldest, most venerable, and most thoroughly organized of our state societies. So here we have another account here in 1854. All right, so let's go to another speech from the Prophet Brigham Young, February 18, 1855. I will here relate a few of the circumstances which I personally knew. So this is interesting. He's going to talk about Luman Walters here in a minute. But he's saying, I personally knew about this concerning the coming forth of the plates from a part of which the Book of Mormon was translated. The fact may be new to several, but I had a personal knowledge with regard to many of those circumstances. So that's important. Brigham Young has a personal knowledge here, and he's going to mention Luman Walters. Okay, so the Prophet Brigham Young continues, I well knew a man who to get the plates rode over 60 miles 3 times the same season that they were obtained by Joseph Smith. So very similar to Lucy Mack Smith's account. They both say 60 miles. I knew a man, probably Luman Walters, about the time of their being delivered to Joseph by the angel. So that's around 1827. That's the right time frame here when Luman Walters was in the Palmyra area. The friends of this man sent for him and informed him that they were going to lose the treasure, though they did not know what it was. All right, Brigham Young continues. The man that I refer to was a fortune teller, necromancer, an astrologer, a soothsayer, and possessed as much talent as any man that walked on the American soil, and was one of the wickedest men that I ever saw. Sounds like Luman Walters, right? Fortune teller, necromancer, soothsayer. A soothsayer is a person supposed to be able to foresee the future, so kind of the same thing as a fortune teller, I guess. Interesting that he calls him a very wicked man, and according to this video, Luman Walters is the mentor of Joseph Smith. So does that make him a wicked man too? All right, Brigham Young continues. The last time that he, Luman Walters, went to obtain the treasure, he knew sure where it was, but did not know its value. So maybe he didn't know they were golden plates? I don't know. Allow me to tell you that a Baptist deacon and others of Joseph Smith's neighbors were the very men who sent for this necromancer the last time that he went for the treasure. So maybe that's Willard Chase, that's been mentioned before. I never heard a man who could swear like that astrologer. He swore scientifically by rule, by note. And we have several other accounts that say that Luman Walters like to do this scientific swearing, whatever that is. To those who love swearing, it was musical to hear him, but not so for me, for I would leave his presence, because of course he's a holy prophet, right? Brigham Young. Okay, he would call Joseph Smith everything that was bad and say, I believe that he will get the treasure after all. And he did get it, and the war commenced directly, I guess, to try to steal the golden plates, which to my mind didn't exist. Maybe there were some fake ones made. Here's some plates that somebody made. It looks like you got 2/3 there that are sealed in bands. This maybe the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon. And then you got like the top third that's not sealed that went to making the Book of Mormon that we have today, supposedly. And supposedly Joseph Smith was running around with these super heavy, large plates. Okay, when Joseph Smith obtained the treasure, interesting, he calls the golden plates the treasure. The priests, the deacons, and the religionists of every grade went hand in hand with the fortune teller Luman Walters and with every wicked person to get it out of Joseph Smith's hand. And to accomplish this, a part of them came out and persecuted him, Joseph. Okay, we come to a new speech here by the prophet Brigham Young, July 19, 1857. He says, I never heard such oaths fall from the lips of any man as I heard uttered by a man who was called a fortune teller, probably Luman Walters, and who knew where those plates were hid. He went 3 times in one summer to get them, the same summer in which Joseph Smith did get them. Okay, Brigham continues. Baptist, Presbyterian, and Methodist priests and deacons sent for Luman Walters to tell where those plates were. They wanted to get that treasure and to get them out of the Hill Cumorah where they were deposited. And he had not returned to his home from the last trip that he made for them more than a week or 10 days before Joseph Smith got them. So probably talking about Luman's home in Saunders, New York. Okay, Joseph Smith was what we call an ignorant boy. But this fortune teller, whose name that I do not remember, was a man of profound learning, probably Luman Walters. He had put himself in possession of all the learning in the States, had been to France, Germany, Italy, and through the world, had been educated for a priest and turned out to be a devil. And we have other accounts, too, that Luman Walters traveled in Europe, which really wasn't that common at the time. All right, so the prophet Brigham Young continues here. He, Luman Walters, could preach as well as the best of them, I guess like a pastor or a priest or a reverend. And I never heard a man swear as he did. So that's been mentioned before, too. This is probably Luman. He could tell that those plates were there and that they were a treasure whose value to the people could not be told. For that I myself heard him say. So he's saying he knew Luman. He met Luman and heard him say these things. Those spirits driven from heaven were with him and with others who tried to prevent Joseph Smith from getting the plates. All right, we have a letter to Luman Walters from William S. Green in the Geneva Gazette, 1859. The following was from a letter to Luman Walters, who has a reputation as a physician skilled in the curative properties of roots and yarbs and brandy. So kind of an herb doctor. We have other accounts too that talk about him being this kind of folk physician. He brings to his aid a conjuration stone. Very interesting. This has been mentioned before that Luman Walters had this seer stone or magic stone. Of course, Joseph Smith had his stone. So Luman Walters brings to his aid a conjuration stone which surpasses the credulity or gullibility of Dr. Walters' neighbors. It surpasses their credulity. Okay, William S. Green continues. He's a believer in Walters and wants his help. I am a firm believer in foresight and foresaying, or fortune telling, and reading a person's thoughts by just looking at them. I do know and firmly believe in the genuine and true spiritualist or spiritualism and foretelling, etc. So he's saying, yeah, I believe in you. I believe in foretelling and in the spiritual stuff. All right, so this believer, William S. Green, in a letter to Luman Walters, 1859. Sir, can you and will you tell me what my luck is and will be to come, whether good or bad, and what I shall be likely to follow and will do the best at, and in what place? Basically, fortune telling. All right, so the letter continues. And if you can and will lend me your influence in the practice as a physician, in the healing art of disease, also what you will ask for me this, or basically how much money it's going to cost, if you can and will give me this aid, I am poor, and that you can see in your conjuration stone. So again, he mentions this conjuration stone. Pictured above, we have another one of the seer stones of Joseph Smith. All right, we come to the next account. This is from Pomeroy Tucker's book, Origin, Rise, and Progress of Mormonism, 1867. A pretty important book. A lot of historians like this book. He says, these pioneer Mormon disciples, so far as their names can now be recollected, are as follows. So he gives a list of Mormon disciples in the early days. And on the list, he mentions Luman Walters of Pulteneyville, New York. And I'll show you where that is in relation to Sodus on the next slide. It is believed that this list, which Luman Walters was on, embraces all the persons residing at or near the prime seat of the Mormon Advent, or the Mormon beginning, who from first to last made a profession of belief either in the money-digging or the Golden Bible finding pretensions of Joseph Smith, Jr. So interesting. Pomeroy Tucker here identifying him, Luman Walters, as an early Mormon disciple and at or near the prime seat of the Mormon beginnings. And we know that that's the time frame that Luman Walters was in the area. Okay, so we can see Sodus, New York here on the right side, and Pulteneyville is just a few miles to the west of Sodus. And it looks like if you take this whole route from Palmyra to Pulteneyville to Sodus, it's about 25 miles. Okay, an account here from Fayette Lapham, an interview with the father of Joseph Smith 40 years ago. So that'd be about 1840, supposedly interview, but this is not being printed until 1870 in the Historical Magazine. So Fayette says his son, Joseph Smith Jr., when he was about 14 years of age, happened to be where a man was looking into a dark stone and telling people therefrom where to dig for money and other things. So maybe this was Luman Walters. 14 is a little too young to fit in to the time frame when Luman Walters was in the area. Age 17, about the year 1822 would fit in better with the Luman Walters timeline. So maybe he got the age wrong. This sounds like it's a statement from Fayette Lapham, thinking that Joseph was about 14. Maybe he was around 17. But he saw a man looking into a dark stone and telling people where to dig for money. Historian Dale Morgan said that this person was Luman Walters. You can see Dale Morgan on early Mormonism for that, and I have the source there. Okay, Fayette Lapham continues. Supposedly an interview with Joseph Smith's father in 1840. Joseph Smith requested the privilege of looking into Lumen stone, which he did by putting his face into the hat where the stone was. So according to Fayette Lapham, Luman Walters is using the same technique with a stone in a hat that later Joseph Smith would use. So that's very interesting. Okay, Fayette Lapham continues. It proved to be not the right stone for Joseph Smith, but he could see some things, and among them he saw the stone and where it was, in which he could see whatever he wished to see. So he couldn't see a lot, but he could see some things, and he could see where his own seer stone was. I think the first one he got was down in Sally Chase's well. Okay, the interview with the father of Joseph Smith by Fayette Lapham continues. The place where he saw the stone was not far from their house, and under pretense of digging a well, they found water and the stone at a depth of 20 or 22 feet. After this, Joseph Smith spent about 2 years looking into his stone, telling fortunes, where to find lost things, and where to dig for money and other hidden treasure. This was just like Luman Walters, right? And it's interesting that it says that Joseph Smith used the stone to tell fortunes. That's something that Luman Walters did too. And pictured above, we have a sign about the money diggers in New York, and you can just look at that. Okay, we can go to another account here. This is from Artemisia Snow. I'm not sure how you say that. Artemisia Snow or Beeman. An account in Elizabeth Kane's journal. This is 1873 now. Says a man named Walters, son of a rich man, probably Luman Walters, received a scientific education, was even sent to Paris. After he came home, he lived like a misanthrope. He had come back an infidel, believing neither in man nor God. So kind of similar to what Brigham Young was saying. Okay, so Artemisia Snow or Beeman continues. Luman Walters was a sort of a fortune teller. A man I knew rode up, and before he spoke, the fortune teller said, "You needn't get off your horse. I know what you want. Your mare ain't stolen." Says the man, "How do you know what I want?" And says Walters, "I'll give you a sign. You've got a respectable wife and so many children. At this minute, your wife has just drawn a bucket of water at the well to wash her dishes. Okay, look at your watch and find out if it ain't so when you get home. As to your mare, she's not a dozen miles from home. She strayed into such neighborhood, and as they didn't know who she was, they put her up until she should be claimed. My fee is $1. Now be off." So this is Luman Walters probably telling Artemisia Snow or Beeman where this lost horse is, and then charging $1. Okay, the account continues. This man Walters was sent for 3 times to go to the Hill Cumorah to dig for treasure. People knew that there was treasure there. Beeman was one of those who sent for him. He came. Each time he said that there was treasure there, but that he couldn't get it, though there was one that could, probably Joseph Smith, and pictured above is the Hill Cumorah. Okay, the last time that he came, he, Walters, pointed out Joseph Smith, who was sitting quietly among a group of men in the tavern, and said there was the young man that could find the treasure in the Hill Cumorah, and he cursed and swore about him in a scientific manner. It was awful. So, yeah, very similar to what Brigham Young was saying. All right, Richard Van Wagner talks about this in The Natural Born Seer. He's pictured above. Luman Walters convinced a few people that the most prominent hill in the area, one that was owned by the Robinson family, later called Mormon Hill or also Hill Cumorah, concealed treasure. Walters convinced people that the Hill Cumorah had hidden treasure. All right, a new account here from Kelly and Braden's public discussion of the issues between the RLDS Church and the Church of Christ Disciples. Discussion had in Kirtland, Ohio, 1884. So they say, while acting in his primitive supernatural capacity as water witch and money digger, Joseph Smith made the acquaintance of a drunken vagabond by the name of Luman Walters, who had been a physician in Europe. This person had learned in Europe the secret of mesmerism or animal magnetism. And remember, probably P. Pratt was talking about mesmerism as well. All right, Kelly and Braden continue. Joseph Smith learned this art, I guess, of mesmerism. And like all men with great passions, vitality, and physical force, he was almost a prodigy in his mesmeric power. All casting out devils and raising the dead were merely a display of his great mesmeric power. So that's interesting. They kind of believed in this kind of stuff back in this day, mesmerism and things like this. I'd like to see the evidence for Joseph Smith casting out devils and raising the dead as Jesus did. Probably not very good evidence. Okay, another source here from the New York Geneva Daily Times, July 26, 1929, so quite a bit later now. Article entitled "Doctor of Olden Days Used Herb Remedies: Reminiscences of Dr. Luman Walters, who was noted for his cures, which were accomplished by peculiar personal methods." So in this account, it says Dr. Luman Walters was a native of Vermont and ran away from home when he was 6 years old. I don't know if that's true. I don't have any other corroborating evidence for that. His people never seen or hearing of him again until he was a full-fledged doctor. Okay, same source here. Luman would never divulge of who brought him up, he having worked his way through medical school. Shortly after leaving medical school, he located at Sodus Point, New York, which we know is near Palmyra, New York, and that was when he was interacting with the Smith family. But he later came to Gorham, New York, which we've talked about, where he began the practice of medicine. All right, the account continues. According to older residents here, Dr. Walters was one of the town characters. He engaged several men to gather various roots, such as burdock, mustard, and other forms of vegetation, which he compounded into a medicine at his laboratory. So these kind of a root and herb doctor. Maybe got out of the money digging profession. You know, it was illegal. Maybe he had too many people mad at him and after him, so now he's kind of becoming an herb doctor. All right, same source here. People came from every state in the Union to take his treatments. One of Dr. Walters' specialties was reading the mind and being able to tell people where they could find lost articles, friends, and the future. So maybe he is still doing some fortune telling and telling people where they can find treasure and lost articles still. All right, another account here from Diedrich Willers Jr. of Fayette, New York. Joseph Smith was living in Fayette, New York in 1829 and 1830. So Diedrich Willers says, fortune tellers are consulted as to the future. Many in this neighborhood, where they wish to find something or anything which is lost, or pry into hidden mysteries or hidden things, and they will consult Dr. Luman Walters. So, kind of interesting here. All right, we also have his obituary, which was in the Auburn Weekly Union in 1860. It says, Dr. Luman Walters, for many years known as a successful but eccentric practitioner of the medical profession, died at his residence at Bethel, Ontario County, which is now Gorham, New York. On Saturday last, he styled himself a seer or clairvoyant doctor, kind of like Joseph, right? And has effected many very wonderful cures. He only required the name and age of his patient to enable him to give a complete diagnosis of the case without seeing the person. All right, so here is a picture of Luman Walters' tombstone in Potter, New York. I believe this was photographed by Dan Vogel. Luman Walters died on June 2nd, 1860 at the age of 72, so fairly old for the time frame. But that's going to do it for this video. Do you think there's enough evidence to show that Luman Walters was a mentor to Joseph Smith? This is pretty much all the evidence that we have. I gathered it all up. Took about an hour and a half to go over. But that's going to do it for this video, and I thank you for watching the Luman Walters, Joseph Smith's mentor video.